Anna Deavere Smith, for notes on the field and putting that whole project together. You interviewed 250 people, I think. Whether you've got so many people you've talked to, how do you choose what stories to include and what to you were the important things?
Right. Well, yeah, it was a lot of people and a lot of hours of stuff. A lot of times when I'm talking to people, they say something that is so interesting to me that I know it has to be in the play. And then they become kind of like the foundation. And then I'm looking for other stuff to fill it out. And also, you know, really in the rehearsal hall itself, because, you know, obviously I'm using my whole body and psyche. It's not just words on a page. And so it's a little bit like choreography or making a dance in that way, is that I come to rehearsal early on, trying out the different people, and then pretty much every night I kind of revise the play, almost like writing a different thing every night until I have something that's not too long. And then, of course, in making a movie, you have the opportunity to really, as we did, spend the most of last summer in the editing room getting it down to 89 minutes.
And do you have just a moment from one of those interviews that you, when you heard it, you were like, oh, that's a foundational piece, like an example for us?
Yeah, sure. The second person who is in the movie, Kevin, who is the guy who took the video of Freddie Gray being beaten. You know, the minute he opened his mouth, I knew, oh no, he has to be in it. You know, and he also said some things that are very appropriate to the time, like the camera's the only weapon that we have. It's the only thing that we have to protect ourselves. It's not illegal. Stuff like that speaks to this whole historic moment, not just to what happened in Baltimore.
The film touches on issues of social justice, issues of education, issues of inequality. What would you say is one of the most important things you want people to take away from the film and your performances?
Well, I really want them to take away what John Lewis says at the end of the film when he says, you know, keep the faith, never lose faith. You know, I really want them to feel that. And I want them to feel like it is possible to make a difference.
There was, like, in the film, I felt a particular emphasis on the ideas of sort of faith, grace, and forgiveness, which are quite positive messages in sort of the face of some quite negative stories and sort of some sad stories too. What role, particularly in today's time, which can be quite a negative time, and especially like if we look at last year's, the 2016 election, it did seem like anger was what was fueling a lot of people. What role do you think grace and forgiveness has in sort of addressing these issues?
Well, I think grace is important as a sort of an antidote, as an alternative universe. I see that you have something behind you of the West Wing, which is a show that I used to be on. And I know a lot of people and a lot of Americans felt like the West Wing was sort of the alternate reality of what was really going on in Washington in those days. And now I think it's beyond what's going on in Washington. I believe that where there's hate, there's love. And it's almost as if there was hate hiding that we didn't know about. It emerged. And so I'm to quote Gloria Steinem, I'm a hopeaholic, and I believe where there's hidden hate, there's hidden love. So beyond politics, I think we have an opportunity in the arts and in other kinds of leadership to show other ideas, other ways of being together. I think Howard Schultz just showed that with how he dealt with what happened at Starbucks by shutting down all the stores and having a time for everybody to come together and think about race relations in this country and the history. So I think we have a moment where it's really a great opportunity for people to step forward and provide other kinds of leadership. I believe love is a form of leadership. You know, we certainly have had great spiritual leaders in history who have preached love. It seems like the soft stuff, but I believe in it.
Yeah, I know you use footage from the I think it was the Emmanuel Church victims forgiving the shooter, which always brings like sort of chills whenever I see that. footage as sort of like people that don't necessarily hold political office using a real moment of leadership there.
Well, that's also, it's a Christian idea. I think they were speaking out of their Christianity. And then to some extent, I went to Rwanda 10 years after the genocide when there was a whole campaign, Gacaca trials, and forgiveness. In some ways, forgiveness is just a way of being able to move forward and say we can't keep killing each other. There's also that.
There's a line in the film where you talk about how avoidance, where avoidance is there, the trauma continues. And it made me think more broadly, what role do you think avoidance within society and culture, perhaps avoidance of the uncomfortable, can help propagate a lot of these issues?
That's a fantastic question. So I'm really happy that you were able to hear that line that way. I mean, it means a lot to me that you were able to hear that line that way. Of course, it has to do with your imagination and your intellect, but that is I think, a kind of subtle thing that I wanted to suggest, whereas Dr. Victor Carrion is really talking about avoidance in a psychological way, but it's also in the ways in which society, we don't want to look at things. We want to pretend they're not there. And it just makes things worse. It just makes the badness continue. It doesn't make it go away. And it can make it more intense.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's very easy to look at the sort of villains in these issues, the people who are doing the great atrocities, but we need to sort of, I guess, look at ourselves and the things that we just allow to happen.
That's right. That's right. Well, I am sort of on an army of myself and maybe only 2 or 3 other people against passive observance, and even in the theater. So when this play was conceived of and the first productions of it, I stopped the show in the middle and sent the audience out into small groups of 20, like 500 people every single night, groups of 20, to have facilitated conversations with just like, what are you going to do about this? What's your relationship to this? It's all well and good to sit back and watch me and go, oh, whatever you want to say about my performance. But I'm really only here to try to get a conversation going, which will get change to happen.
And you're not just an actress and a writer, you're also a teacher.
Yeah.
And what do you think is something that, when you have students and things, is the thing that you most want to teach them in terms of being active?
Well, the most important thing that I want to teach is how they should become a self-sufficient, caring community. And so on the first day of class, I always tell them, I'm going to talk a lot. I say, I'm going to talk a lot for the first couple of weeks, but in success, by the last class, I'll say almost nothing, and you will take over. And so I work very hard and very specifically with help of other people, Stephanie Schneider in my office and others, to make a community of active participation. I value collaboration over competition. And most importantly, a caring community where they can do work that is deep and personal, and where they learn that what they're doing as artists is not just about themselves, but about giving other people something to live for and live about. So yeah, I think of it as a community, and most importantly, that they learn their independence from school. That they learn that education is about finding questions, not answers. I always start every class by saying that confidence is overrated, give doubt a try. So I'm trying to prepare people to live with uncertainty, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. From doing notes on the field, what is the biggest question that you found?
Wow, that is also an excellent, excellent question. I think the biggest question I came out of this with was why? I mean, I grew up in a segregated town. I came up through the civil rights movement. And why? Why do white people not like black people? Why do schools remain, for all intents and purposes, segregated right now? So, yeah, I mean, that may sound like a really simple, silly question, but yeah, it's why. So I guess where I would have to go next is probably outside of politics and into another way of thinking about humans, and maybe a spiritual way. I did some interviews of the French translator for the Dalai Lama some time ago, who's written a lot on loving kindness, who's considered the happiest man in the world. He's been studied. I guess they've looked at him carefully, Matthew Ricard. And so I think maybe next I'll have to go in a different direction than politics to understand some things about human beings, how we are, and what inhibits us. We'll go back to that word I just used before. What inhibits us from loving one another? I know that probably sounds like really schmaltzy, but it's really where I am.
Yeah. Well, maybe we need a bit more schmaltz today, perhaps. Anna, what do you think the role is of well, actually, sorry, I'm going to ask, what's a favorite moment you have from Notes on the Field? What's a sort of section of that that's particularly poignant for you?
There's no favorite moment because, look, I had like probably about 300 hours of material. So there's no, I would say there's no favorite moment, that's in it. There were favorite moments in the journey when we found ourselves in this Indian reservation, and Abby Abenanti, who I performed, really welcomed me to that reservation. They're a river tribe, the Yurok. I think that was a big favorite moment for me. When we, by chance, when we were in South Carolina, really, we were talking to like a administrator of a school, and we asked a certain question. She said, "You got to talk to Miss Rivers." And she called up this woman, Beatrice Rivers, who didn't even want to come because her hair didn't look right. And Beatrice Rivers ends up being a person who signed, her name is on the petition for one of the first claims against segregation, even before Brown versus Board of Education, in a case called Briggs versus Elliott. I think meeting Miss Rivers in that way, that was an absolute accident. We went into a juvenile facility in Maryland that was just heartbreaking, spending some time with two of the young kids there and talking to them and learn about their lives. So there are a lot of things that I cherish from our time on the road. But there's no real favorite moment in the film. It's all my favorite moments. It really is.
You play all these different characters in the film. It's a one-woman show that you initially did as a theatre piece. What role do you think through that, why did you choose that method of using the arts to sort of teach what you teach and tell the stories you tell?
Yeah, well, like arts is another form of leadership that really has an opportunity to step forward now. And, I way back when I was studying to be an actor, I was in a conservatory in San Francisco. I think I don't have words for it because I was such a novice at the time, but I became very interested in more than just, being and doing scene work. I began to see that there were certain people in the world who were incredibly expressive and could cause change just by the way they talked. Obvious person would be Martin Luther King, but also FDR. And I just became really interested in that, which is how can expression lead to action? And inevitably, when you're in that, if that's your interest, you're going to trip over the place where politics moves in the middle of it. You're going to trip over activism. Who are the people who can get people to go do something? And so that's kind of how this journey began for me, is trying to get starting out like with a sort of falling in love with Shakespeare, and then getting to see how can the speech act be something around which change can happen.
Just to sort of finally switch gears, Anna, you mentioned the DVDs I had behind me, and for years you played Nancy McNally on The West Wing. What's your when you look back on your time on that show, is there a particular day shooting or scene or moment that you sort of just look back on fondly?
I look back on very fondly the number of conversations that I had between scenes with Martin Sheen, and he has become a very good friend of mine as a result. He and his wife Janet Sheen. Very fond memories of standing on the side between setups talking to Martin Sheen. So and look, that was a gift to be on The West Wing. It was so well written. Such an extraordinary amount of people. Oh, another thing I remember, I used to call Sandy Berger, who had been the national security advisor to Clinton, to find out, like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And I'll never forget one time I'd get my script and I would call him and say, well, what would you do if you were, what would the national security really advisor do? What does this mean? And I came upon the name of a country and I said, where is this country? He said, I don't know. And I looked it up in the dictionary, just the dictionary. And it said a fictional country in Aaron Sorkin's The West Wing. So for me, the moment when it's like the West, he's in the dictionary. Wow. This is one cat. This is one cool cat.
He's like Shakespeare got in the dictionary quite a bit. Aaron's on his heels. Anna, it's been so great talking to you about Notes on the Field. All the best of luck for the upcoming Emmy Awards, which it's eligible for. And we're just lovely to chat.
Well, thank you for your really great questions and just having taken the kind of time you took to look at it so perceptively. I really appreciate this conversation. Really my favorite art is the art of conversation. I feel like we had a bit of that right here. So thank you.
Oh, that's good. I feel like that as well. And thank you, Anna. It's really nice